All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a special guest on, William Yeske. He is the author of Damn the Valley, veteran of the U.S. Army for 11 years, in the 82nd Airborne, and Afghan veteran. I am very excited to have you on. I always have a previous conversation with our guests right before we start, and this one excites me. So it's very close to my heart. Infantrymen fighting in Afghanistan. I think it's safe to say for all of us that serve there, it's another place that as hellish as it was, or as crazy as it was, it holds a place in your heart. Like it's you care about the mission, you care about the people. And I know you guys were more south. I was in the northeast, and the beauty of Afghanistan is, to me, I do miss that. But when I have guests on like you coming in, especially infantry, fighting in those years, the exact same years we fought, in the exact same years, 2008, 2009, it always takes me down memory lane. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me, Ethan. I know, like we probably could have recorded everything that we were talking about before, just because
I catch myself doing that all
we're
the
starting
time.
to go down these rabbit holes.
Yeah, exactly. I do that every time with guests too. I'm like, all right, we got to stop because let's press record and let's get going. Yeah. No, this is great. So, how did you let's just do a basic intro. So how did you get into the Army, and then what led you into, deploying and then eventually writing the book?
I mean, how does a good portion of us get into the Army to begin with? It's this one in particular I wasn't doing anything with my life at the time. It was a girl crushed my heart, and I was in this spiral of I'm not doing anything better out there. But I've always had that. I always had that purpose to back there instilled in there to try and do something bigger than myself. And the military was always something I wanted to do. And I know it sounds cheesy and whatnot, but at the time it was, so I was a little bit older. I was 26 at the time when I joined up, but Afghanistan had been going for a few years. I'd seen the towers, hit when I was in college. I actually remember right where I was. I was in the college cafeteria in between classes when I think we were playing pool at the time. And, this gaggle starts going over by where the one little television was in the cafeteria. And it was sort of like, whoa, hey, you guys should see this, and turning around and seeing what was going on. And then, your phones, everything's starting to go down and whatnot. And this disbelief of what is happening right now. So I grew up in Connecticut. So you have New York right there. You could actually, in the days afterwards and stuff, you could see the smoke. You had the haze, you could smell the burning and stuff. It was very real. A bunch of people joined up right during there. I mean, of course, you hear the stories, the lines and whatnot. I had looked to join in the Marines prior to signing up on the line for college. So, that pull was there and stuff too. But it was like, hey, finish this end. That end actually never even finished, the college end, and got involved with this girl. But then the opportunity presented itself to where, hey, she's gone, what are you doing with your life? Let's reevaluate. I wanted to hit that reset button, and I found myself in the 18X program, headed for airborne school, the kid that was afraid of heights. So but it was just that means to an end. It was get out there and do what needed to be done. I ended up getting dropped like a bunch of people out of the SF pipeline just due to what this was. I got hurt in SOPSI. Mm-hmm. It was during the land nav portion. I had done something wrong. My leg was all messed up, and I got shot over to med hold. And shortly thereafter, I think it was like a week after I was in med hold, they just blanket cut everybody. It was there had been a bunch of malingerers. There was like 400 some odd people in med hold over there at the time. Yeah. So, I mean, it was necessary. I tried to appeal the decision at the time, but good luck with the cadre that was there.
Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah. And what years was that?
That was, let's see, because I found myself signing into the 82nd. So it was there March of 2008 is when I signed on the dotted line to go into the military. And by December of 2008, I was signing into the 82nd.
Okay.
And then that was 2009, September 2009, leaving for Afghanistan. So, I mean, when I got there, I think we were actually starting ITC cycle that very next week. So it was ITC, then we went to JRTC, and then, so it was train up one thing after another, and then Afghanistan. And
yeah, that's, it's funny you tell those stories too, especially in that time frame, because everybody thought that it was out of everyone's head. So I was like that. I joined the Marine Corps right after high school in 05. And so Afghanistan wasn't even on people's minds, and we fought in Iraq. I did 2 tours there. And I remember my brother called me up and he was going, dude, I'm going to Afghanistan. He's my older brother, but he joined later. So it was his first deployment. He was a combat engineer. And I go, what's in Afghanistan? You're going to be a boot for the rest of your career, as the neighbor says, cherry. So he was like, shit, So at about probably a few weeks later, I get back from my deployment to the Fallujah provinces. I get back. It's pretty quiet there. It wasn't an exciting deployment as a scout sniper. Came back. And then we start getting after actions of the sniper platoons directly into our hooch and our emails and SIPRNet. And we were like, how the hell do we get to Afghanistan? And then Afghanistan blew up in the news in 2008. It was just all, 1-6.
Oh yeah. It got hot.
It got hot. And then come to find out, the guys that were there were like, it's always been hot. It's never stopped being hot. They're like, it's been an insane firefight. It's like, you're on your own out there. And so I ended up hopping on, the combat advisor teams and everything. But yeah, it's crazy how that workup, you join and then boom, you're right into it. And you got, like I said, 08 and 09. Holy shit. Yep. There was a time to hit Afghanistan. Yeah.
Oh, that was, we definitely hit it at the height. That's for sure. Especially, I mean, we went in. So it was kind of weird. We were actually slated for Iraq in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And there was executive orders that came down as they did that surge into Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So we ended up deploying to Afghanistan really without a clear mission, which is how we ended up in the very first part of it in Helmand province.
Yeah.
So this all fell under on how we ended up in the Arghandab was our battalion commander had been General Stanley McChrystal's aide at one point, or on some sort of capacity. I got to actually figure out exactly what happened there. Again, a lot of this book is done from our level. There's a little bit more beyond it. I haven't completely pulled apart everything yet, but regardless of the fact, we ended up in, he was looking for a mission, and it was, hey, what do you got? I have a bunch of paratroopers down in Helmand province operating out of Lashkar on this training mission with Afghan police just up and down the highway. They're not being utilized though, for what these guys were trained up to do. What have you got? What do you have that's kinetic in the battle space? Let's go. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, we got the surge into Kandahar coming, and we replaced 117 out there, which had already been in the valley down there, but were considered combat ineffective. They were already, anytime they tried to roll through the valley, strikers, there was actually at one point, they double stacked tank mines and blew a striker, just vaporized, completely blew a striker in half. And it was hell. It was hell for them. We came into a situation to where we were expecting heavy resistance just coming in. And it was funny because when we came in, when we ripped into the valley, there's nothing, you're like, where's,
yeah,
where's it all going down? What's happening? But sure enough, come springtime, we had our first KIA the day after Christmas, which, that was on a patrol that was supposed to be overlooking a bomb maker's compound. But springtime, everything just started amping up, and it was to where anytime they tried to take us on with anything direct action and whatnot, we put them in severe check, but they were like, okay, well, we can't take these guys that way, so we're going to back off and we're just going to lay in landmines everywhere, mm-hmm. And hamper movement there. And it was fighting ghosts left and right. The amount of landmines we pulled out, I can pull out the ARCOM at some point, but hundreds. It was like almost every other patrol you were finding something or hitting something.
Before we keep going with this podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All materials ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is VALLEY20 for 20% off 9line products. I say again, VALLEY20, VALLEY 20. Not 10, not 15, but 20%. Not 25 because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the 9line podcast for future discount codes and more conversations with amazing guests like today. And now back to the podcast.
Yeah. And so were they using like old Russian mines? Were they like IED type, or like what kind of munitions? I mean, I imagine they're throwing everything together, but in Afghanistan, for the listener, like they've been demining since the Soviet Afghan War. So we would, in the Northeast, we would see that like NGOs were clearing mountainsides that haven't been touched in decades, and then they were finally cleared. Yep. So they had like red X's or something that were like indicating that they were demining them. And then Bagram, I don't know if you ever flew through Bagram. There's still live minefields. They just didn't clear them. Like
even
next to the air
one on the far
end
of the
yeah. So like, and then I had heard my senior Marines way back in 2004 were like, yeah, we accidentally walked into a minefield and everybody had to freeze. And this was back in 2004, so it wasn't like the 08 time frame we were in where it's like you might have been really fucked. It was more of like we accidentally stumbled across this old Soviet minefield, and so they had to like back out and everything. But so were they getting new munitions, like new anti-tank, or was it like old stuff stacked or just crazy?
So it was such a combination with stuff. I think a lot of the stuff with the larger things like the tank mines and stuff were meant for the guys before us. Once we came in, we didn't go anywhere mounted. Everything was dismounted. We went everywhere, like we walked everywhere.
Yeah.
And so when we cleared out where Cop Ware was, when we came into the valley, there was a Afghan police checkpoint, which turned into Cop Johnston. So that was in our rear. And then we cleared forward with, so it was 1st Platoon and 3rd Platoon that cleared forward. We cleared out the spot for what became Combat Outpost Ware. Mm-hmm. And we would operate out of there. So 2 platoons from there. Once first started experiencing casualties, and we started to have casualties either from AP mines. There was a lot of homemade stuff. There was we would find the hockey pucks that were either Russian or Chinese. There was some Iranian munitions. I mean, like there was such a mix of everything out there. And then you have on top of it homemade explosives.
Yep.
So they got the big yellow jugs with a bunch of HME, and you throw a bunch of either nails and jacks and just everything known to man inside of that stuff. So you got a bunch of shrapnel flying at you. There was really I always thought, just due to the fact where they're not exposed to all of the things that we are, the technology or that end of things. So like that, the ingenuity, and we kind of coined it as Hodgenuity, but the ingenuity that they had out there was just, it was insane, because you'd see these. I mean, we used to see it with the, the jingle trucks and stuff. Like, how do you put a freaking, like, a level of cars on top of a jingle truck? We even.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember those. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or how these guys would irrigate the fields out there. Just multiple things to where it was like, you realize that line of thinking wasn't along the same way that you were thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like they were. Yeah. It's not like they were like, oh, we have to defeat the Western type of technology. They just knew the simplest form that was effective. So like, I remember I was fielding metal detectors in 2010. So I got out of the Marine Corps and went back to Afghanistan within like 4 months as a contractor. And I was helping field metal detectors in 2010. I went to all sorts, like 13 different fobs, helped, field. I don't remember. I think they were Valin metal detectors. But we were getting all the after actions from the Joint Counter IED Task Force. And
Jaido.
Yeah, Jaedo, exactly. Yep. And so they were the most ingenious thing I ever heard. I'm sure there's more, but all it was a wires to a clothespin, and then it was fishing wire onto cardboard or something, and that was it. That was the trigger.
Yep.
And it blew I was like, that is the most simplest, ingenious tactic, because you can stick that anywhere, and all it is just closes it. And so we dealt with stuff in Iraq that was the pressure plates, but they were using saw blades, or they were bigger, or they were trying to figure that out. The one guy, poor bastard, I should say poor bastard, but it was the one time that we were in the FOB in Iraq. Everybody was in. It was like the one time, and a IED goes off. So we're like, well, that's weird, because map sections in the wire were on the wire. No one got hurt. Come to find out, some dipshit was putting in an IED with cardboard as a pressure plate, and they touched and blew himself up. So that was pretty funny. So it was funny though, because we all knew, like, wait a minute, everyone's inside the wire, so we're good. So this is, it was just everyone like looking at each other.
What was that?
Yeah. We're like, well, map's in, we're in, and then, he blew himself up. But I heard about that clothespin, and I think there's like a field of those in the South. I was here, and I can't remember which location, but they were saying it was so devastating because they can't pick up on them.
Sewing needle.
Yeah.
That was the hockey pucks. There was actually either sewing needles or cut off what's the safety pins.
Yeah.
And it was just the small, like, how are you gonna, especially in an area to where there's already a high iron ore content in the soil.
Yep.
Because we were dealing with it it would defeat our radios. We couldn't get far, because not only the soil content, but then you have all of that soil built into the mud walls.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have wall after wall after wall as you're moving through the valley's terrain, and we had an OP up on the mountainside to where a lot of it would have to get relayed through the OP, just because you didn't have direct comms with anybody. You'd have to put the full on long whip up to get any comms out. Once you were past something like, once you were a click out, it was radio silent unless you were talking to the OP. It was crazy.
Oh, wow. That's crazy thing, because we didn't deal with that. But again, that's terrain. Know your terrain, and we didn't deal with that, but we were in the mountains. So it was like, you dip into a valley or you dip into a hill, like, you better be good at comms. Yep. Yeah. We had a lot of backups.
Dark side of the moon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Which was always kind of crazy. Like, people didn't realize that, because Iraq, again, not to compare it to Iraq, but like when people say, especially back in the day when they're like, oh, that's just like Iraq. I was like, no, it's not. These are two completely, take Iraq out of the situation. Like this, it's not even the same war. It's not even the same tactics. It is like you're fighting in Europe. Just don't even think about Iraq anymore. Like this is completely different. And people were used to being, you got hit with an IED, but everything was streets and urban. So guess what? The cars just roll right. They'll be there with, QRF will be here within 10, 15 minutes, even in a big firefight, even in a big tick. They'll be here within an hour. Afghanistan, you're alone in those valleys, man. And you're 3 valleys separated from the medevac. And if shit goes sideways and you don't have comms, no one's going to find you. They're not coming for you.
Yep.
So
that was one of the biggest things on my part, was knowing my job as far as comms with that, because I ended up, when we hit the Arghandab, I had been a machine gunner in Helmand, and that's when they handed the radio off to me.
Yeah.
I became the RTO. I actually wanted the job, nobody wants that job.
No, they don't.
And I had wanted to be an 18 Echo. So I was like, yes, this is the perfect on the job training that I could possibly get.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is awesome.
Mindset shift.
Yeah. And I learned to love radios. I'm with you. And so my Afghan deployment, radios were my best friend. And I was a scout sniper. So I was like, oh yeah, guns, everything. Radio, it was the most effective in Afghanistan. I loved it. I'm with you on that.
Heck
yeah. So especially in Afghanistan, absolutely.
And with the medevacs that you're saying too, I mean, that was the most crucial thing. Like, we had the talk would always have like we had the pre-done up line 9 line on a board and stuff up there for template. So all I would have to do is be like, hey, last frontline trace, we got 2 urgent surgical. And so we had PJs, we had Pedro right over in Kandahar. And if I called it up and they were on it and Pedro was on duty, which happened for everything but one of them, they were there in 10 minutes. unbelievable freaking guys.
Yeah.
But when you
That's
go
awesome.
back and look at their heritage and their pedigree from the Jolly Green Giant and stuff in Vietnam, you know, it's unbelievable just to see those guys in action doing their job. Like PJs are, man, those guys are awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Super cool guys.
Exactly. And that's the thing too, is funny with the medevacs. Afghanistan really tested everyone's limits, you know, because when we were training, they'd go, they need this amount of space to fly in. They need this amount of space to come in. They need this. It's like Afghanistan, we were on a terrace and we're doing a medevac. I've seen the rotors nearly hit the rock terrace and get ripped apart. And they're landing on like a 20 by 20 or whatever, 30 by 30, just enough the size of the Black Hawk itself and under fire. And they'll do it, you know, and like one Black Hawk did a head fake and like did a fake and drew fire. And then the second one came and slammed down and we, you know, got them in. And so it tests everyone's limits there, you know, and you really get to see, and those medevac guys, man, they were phenomenal. They would go anywhere, you know. So seeing Afghanistan really pushed the limits of every unit's potential or what they could do, or, you know, or beyond what they think they could do, you know. And but I agree with you though. Especially on the radio aspect, that was the lifeline, and you know, being able to call those as I was doing the same, I was calling in medevacs, and to be able to help know that situation and control it like that, I think that gave you a little more sense of control, you know, over the situation of chaos. Master the chaos.
Well, the neat part too is when you're an RTO, you know, I mean, you're low Joe on the totem pole, but at the same time, now as the RTO, you're getting to go into these briefs with the platoon sergeant. You know, you're getting to take the notes on stuff. You're getting to hear, all right, this is what's actually behind this patrol. You know, you're getting a little bit more of a picture there, as well as communicating. So you're getting a little bit better of a battle picture. It really worked out for the book in the way of all of these different incidents and stuff. I was out on almost every patrol in the Arghandab, which I'm lucky I got my legs. That's for sure.
Yeah.
To this day, you know, I don't know how, but you know what, that's cool. I'm just going to keep pushing forward. Don't know why, don't know how. And that's, you know, another thing that we faced over there. You know, it's what are you doing this for? Because at any second, you know, this patrol could be your last.
Yeah.
And it was, well, you know what? I got to be out there carrying the radio because I'm the guy that knows this stuff. You know, you might have cross-trained one or two of the guys in there, and you might have we had an FO that got sent out with us as well. But you know, that's you keep going out for the other guys.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, you guys were fighting in Arghandab. What, again, this is kind of before we hopped on the podcast. What drew you to finally write the book? You know, 10 years later, what finally was like, I'm going to do this. Let's do this.
You know, it was something one of the guys actually said. It's, I'm pretty sure this was the patrol when second squad had come in from first platoon. Second squad had come in to country on Advon party. So they were there a month before everybody else. So just due to how military funding and everything, they're like, all right, we got to get these guys out of Afghanistan early due to Advon. And we were waiting on a bird for them to leave. And Sergeant Robert Muscle goes and says, you know, hey guys, you know, 10 years from now, there's going to be a book with Yeske's name on it on the cover about all this stuff. And I'm like, there's no way, Bobby, like there is no possible way I'm putting this in. Nobody's going to want to hear about a bunch of guys walking through a minefield in Afghanistan. Well, you kind of spoken into existence because here we are all these years later.
Yeah, really. No, that's awesome.
You know, it was something to where the story from our view on the ground, it needed to be told. I know there was another journalist that came through. He interviewed a bunch of the guys and he had put a story together in another book, but it wasn't coming from one of the guys. And it actually drove a little bit of a rift in between the guys of the company. You know, they were like, hey, this is a Marine who wrote this. And the book I'm referring to is Bravo Company with Ben Kessling. Mm-hmm. And their issue was they're like, oh, he's a reporter. He's a journalist. He's not one of us. And I'm like, guys, he was a Marine, you know, I mean, all right. He was an officer. Don't hold that against him. He's out there. You know, this is a Wall Street Journal reporter that's writing down your story, like all he has to go off of is what people can give him, so go tell him your stories. I was one of the ones that I reached out sideline. I had gotten his phone number when we were there, and I was like, there's other guys that need to talk to you here. I'll call you afterwards. And we had talked for, I show up in his book at one point, halfway through. It was during during when Specialist Johnston was hit and killed with that IED. Really one of the main characters in that book, Sergeant Alan Thomas, that's what the focus of that book was on. And, he was my squad leader at one point, and we were in the same platoon. So our interactions and everything were, I did a lot of stuff out there with Thomas, and he was a good dude. But a lot of the guys were like, hey, this is more that angle of that story, or he wasn't there. And, there's things he didn't get right. And I'm like, well, whose fault is that? You guys didn't talk to him about it. And it really, I called him and I was like, you've heard my end of the story. Like, what are your thoughts? And he's like, put it down. He did nothing but encourage me.
Yeah.
Put it down on paper. And really it was due to, I guess, that book kind of pushing this one out there. And again, like we were talking before, we have another book on the way. One of the kids that was across the river from us with 2 Charlie. So Charlie Company, 2nd Platoon, they ended up across the river from us in the Arghandab, and we'd hear hellacious firefights every other day. We actually begged to go over there to help them out, and they're like, no, that's not our AO. That's not our thing. They're fine.
Yeah.
You guys keep doing what you're doing, which is like, man, I keep walking through minefields every other day. Like, this sucks.
I'd rather be in firefights than take on.
Yeah. That's our bread and butter. You're like, what are we doing here? That psychological end of things is, that can really run a number on people. That end of the fight is just a different end of things. But yeah, so Andrew Bragg, Devil's Playground, that's coming out this next fall. And that's just due to, the ripple effect of these stories starting to come out. And he's even talking to me about, the people that have reached out to him from the 101st. And I've also had 101st and guys from 117 and more recently, this is nuts. Afghan refugees. And, believe it or not, there was a picture that I put up on Reddit at one point of, there's a village called Pirapamal. I was at the base of the mountain, to where it was above where Cop Ware was, and an Afghan national living now in the United States reached out to me and was like, that's my hometown village. And I'm like, huh. And he's like, yeah, me and my family evacuated in 2012, and came over to the States and stuff. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I remember when you guys would go on patrol, and he mentioned, I'm not going to let it out exact, but he could describe exactly where the kids would meet us, like mid patrol up what we would call the lock patrol up there, line of communication. We needed to keep this one route clear in case they needed to come in via vehicle. So we just constantly patrol it. And these kids would come out and meet us at this one point, and he described it to a T. And I'm like, whoa, this is wild. Yeah. This is just trippy. And to hear that feedback, but him telling us like, no, you guys were very different. Our interactions out there were very different with you guys. And we were happy that you were there. Like this was not a, you get to hear that back end to where the villagers were scared for their lives. They would get pulled out in the middle of the night, or night letters and stuff would be put out. Like if you're talking to Americans, we're going to kill you. We don't want them in the village. Don't speak to them, keep away from them. People pulled out of their houses at night and either get beat up or limbs chopped off and strung up. That's the type of thing we were facing, and that's the type of reason to where people see that, what were you fighting over there for and stuff? That's what we were fighting for. Yeah. The guys on the ground, we'd see that and that's what we're out there fighting for.
And I agree with that. And I think, and over the years, I got the same question. And even when I was there, I was a combat advisor. So we were really with the Afghan soldiers. We were really with the people. doing humanitarian. So we'd be getting into firefights, and then we would dropping off humanitarian aid, and then we'd be working with, NATO, ISAF. We were on the ground all the time. And, I think that's something that the U.S. military, the guys that are joining to fight, because everyone's like, everybody that doesn't join or fight, they always have some smart ass comment, be like, oh, you're fighting for the American, military industrial complex, or, what are we really doing over there? Or who gives a shit? And you don't get that like face to face, but people, kind of snarkingly say that. And I was like, you know what? Like, and I came to terms with this very early on, even in Iraq, I was like, we're not here for America. Like, I'm just like, we're not here for the US. We're here because there's bad people doing bad things to good people. And sometimes it just boils down to that. Like, I'm going to go do bad things to bad people. And that's just the end of the story.
That saying. I mean, rough men stand to do violence on those behalf that those who can't,
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think that's, so when people are like, well, why are we doing these wars? Like, honestly, we're just going over there. We're just going to kill some bad people. And that's the end of the story. Like, and then they're like, well, what about the follow-on effects? I was like, honestly, sometimes people just need to be killed. And I can't say it any other way. I could put, and I've heard that same quote, and that's a great quote. And that's a very intellectual, it makes us sound way cooler than we are. It just makes the job sound like more more philosophical, or whatever. But it really is I just want to go over and do bad things to bad people. And I really do, and protect people. And I think as an infantryman, as our job is to close with and destroy the enemy. And if that's in a village in Afghanistan, and it truly is those people, I think, because some people are like, well, the Afghans don't want to fight, especially after the evac in 2021. It's like, well, it's more complicated than that, but sometimes people just need to be protected, and that's just what it is. And if that means, that the barbarians are at the gates, but at least the gates are being held, then that's kind of what you have to do. We saw what happened when we pulled out. And I always told people, I was like, was it that big of a deal that we were given $2 to $3 billion a year to a corrupt ass government? Not really. Now it's a black hole. There's no one there.
Yeah.
I worked with a CIA contract. There's no one there. All my connections were like, it's not that the CIA is running around and there's like a few thousand contractors. There is no one fucking there. The CIA has no idea what is going on. The Department of State has no idea what is going on. It is a black hole. And so it's, I think, like I said, when we talk about this, and I agree with you too, because you see the looks on the kids' faces, it always is that thing when people that don't fight the wars, especially the counterinsurgencies or like the GWAT, they're just like, oh my God, just like the people you want there. I was like, nah, these people fucking love us. You interact with them, it's complicated because they're like, oh, because I was like, we're not, going in and executing these people. Like everybody thinks that like somehow we're going in and we're just like putting guns to people's heads and blowing the brains out in front of their family or like mass graves or whatever. It's like none of that. It's like we go over, we hand candy out, and then, and food and supply, and then we get into firefights, and then, we check in on the people. Like we're the only, especially now that you see what's going on in Ukraine. Like I was there in 2022 and people had gone on follow on after me, and they're like, you want to see what war is? Like the Russians have no shit done mass graves. They've executed villages of Ukrainians, and no one says a goddamn word about it. I mean, there is, it's out there, but then everyone's like, well, I was like, you were getting on us about like shutting off a fucking, a pipeline of water into a village, and suddenly it's all over fucking CNN, or some act, we accidentally dropped a bomb on a family, or not like my team, but like the U.S. on accident. Shit happened. And it's like all over CNN for weeks, and then it's like op-eds on why are we even there, and civilian accountability, and it's just like now you see what
are you there? Like, are you? Exactly. Are you piecing about what is really going on down there?
And
like no, you're so far removed that you can sit there and be the good idea fairies.
Exactly.
No, I get that.
Yeah, and it's it's fresh. Back obviously, even that was back then. It was like 10, 12 years ago. But I agree with you, where it's just like, what, I saw the look on the face of the kids that when we were there. The villagers, the Afghan soldiers, the interpreters. They wanted us there. We were their safety net. And talking with their families and going into it, it's like, it was nuts. Like we are, when people talk about, the U.S. military industrial complex, I was like, it is. But at the same time, you don't understand, like guys like us are the ones on the ground. Like the back end people, like I get why you're frustrated with them, but like guys like us, we go in, We do bad things to bad people, and then we help the villagers out. It's
Well,
just
those stories got it. Like you were saying, those stories need to be presented, because a lot of times when you get these stories brought back to you, they're, a lot of the stuff out there is either, we were talking before, special operations, and nothing to downplay everything that they do. Our special ops do a phenomenal job. That's why I wanted to go that way. That's why I actually went to SFAS after this deployment, passed, and tried to move forward in that career path. I see the end of what they do, and it's amazing. It's incredible, but you need to get the other end. And when a lot of the conventional end is presented from either a general that was so far removed, or these people that are just making these books up from, not making them up, but they're putting them together from either AARs or battlefield reports.
Yeah,
they weren't
sources. There. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they weren't there. They don't have, to where guys that were there that have read this book are talking me of, I'm on my couch sitting here reading this book, and I'm getting smells from the Arghandab. I'm getting the smells of the shit river. I'm getting smells as we would come into the village. Like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
And that was new for me, actually, is, whoa, what have I done here? Like, what am I creating? What am I triggering here with these guys? And it was talking with a psychologist and finding out that, those olfactory senses and stuff, indirectly, or it didn't mean to, but this was the picture that was created through this, is enough of a picture to where you are actually activating this trauma loop that these guys are in, because this is the stuff they faced over there. And it's so presented in such a real way that they're having this stuff bubble to the surface. And the reason why they're getting the smells and stuff in there, and this is for anybody who's reading this thing, you're being triggered. These things that were these moments of trauma are bubbling to the surface, and that's the first sense that kind of is tickled within the brain. So when you're getting the smells and stuff out there as you're reading this, and these memories are coming back, know that something is there. Something is there saying, hey, you've been through some stuff. And it's a little, I guess, warning point that, hey, this isn't just another instance, or this isn't something to brush off. This is something you need to deal with. And, I know we have guys that afterwards come back, and there's instances of, suicidal ideation, problems with fitting in society and everything. And I was on more recently with Andy Stumpf and Cleared Hot, but he said something that really stuck with me. And it was, you got to deal with your shit before your shit deals with you. It's very true. And it kind of, writing this brought up a lot of stuff in my own questions and stuff. And it was really through writing this that it put enough of the process in there to where it slowed me down enough to start unpackaging everything that had happened over there. And it was really therapeutic. It was really good for myself in that process. And I really hope that other guys out there, do the same. A lot of the other guys from Bravo Company and stuff are like, why did you do it from just First Platoon? And I'm like, well, number one, the whole book is so packed with stuff. It was easy to put together, but I even told him I left plot holes. A more recent reviewer picked up on it, and he actually said, I wish I would have known more about the bomb team in there that you talked about. You talk about, in the chapter Retribution, you guys taking them out, but what about the hunter killer teams, and what about some of the different things that they would do and the techniques? And I'm like, I left that out for a reason. I find it great that you are wanting to learn more, because I intentionally did that. So it's pretty cool to have these little things in there and stuff come back, but it's really just been about telling other guys, tell these stories. These stories are important, and they're lessons. You had just said the stuff over in Ukraine. Wars will always happen. They'll continue to happen, and there needs to be people that stands up against an enemy that just is careless, or they just have no, I guess, moral compass on the battlefield. Mass graves and things like that. That's not anything we would do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think too, I agree with you on the stories and the aspects too. I find that therapeutic when I would meet up with guys, or it'd be years later, like just, it's like one of those things where you meet up every 4, 5, 10 years, And I remember talking with my buddy Murph, who was a staff sergeant at the time. I think he's now like a captain or a major now at the VMI. And we were at a wedding in Italy, and we were telling stories, and we met up, and I was just like, he closed the loop on things that I didn't like, and I agree with you where it's like, what happened to that? And I was there, I'm like, what was that conversation, or what really happened? He's like, oh dude, this is what happened. Cause he was a staff sergeant. I was a corporal. So it's like, I knew things that he didn't know, and he knew things that I didn't know, like what's going on with hire. Obviously as a corporal, I don't know all the drama that's happening back, but the staff sergeants do, because they're way more privy to it, especially on active duty. It's like, oh, okay, or this is the reason they made this decision, or this is the reason why this decision was made, and it's like, oh, it was like, oh, in my head for like a decade, you're like, oh, that closed the loop, it's just kind of, it's like completing a story that I always kind of wondered about for like 8-10 years. But yeah, I agree with you. And I think leaving those holes, it's like those stories need to be told. And, especially like the hunter killer teams, like you heard, I've heard about some of those in other books. I was like, oh shit, the Army's got hunter killer teams. That sounds fucking awesome. And they kind of briefly touch on it, but like, I do agree with you. I think maybe that era in that time, and I think social media kind of exacerbates. It's like a double-edged sword with social media. It's like you see other people's stories and you're like, oh, our stuff wasn't that cool. It's like, well, no, it was. Once you compact it all, it doesn't mean that you're gonna, it's like the Band of Brothers, or something, or I mean, it is, but there's a lot of stuff that happened, because everybody thinks it's like, well, maybe a few things did happen to me, but it's not that much, or, they kind of go through. It's like, no, a lot of shit did happen to you. And especially when you start talking with other guys like that were with you, it's like those are stories as a whole into a book that should be told. And to really wrap your head around how Afghanistan was, or how Iraq was, or, some of these incidents. I mean, it's kind of like Black Hawk Down. I mean, that incident was only 24 hours, and God knows how many books came of that, how many angles that was, and and same with like Fallujah battle. But even then though, it's like, there's a few books out there, but I mean, Bing West came out right away with one. And then I read it, but I didn't quite understand it. And then I read House to House, from I can't remember his name, not Pearl. I can't remember.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, he received the Medal of Honor, but I'm like, oh my God, So, but then there's other stories about that, like other Marines and Army units that were there. So there's like so many stories that should be told, and I think that is a tough part in our day and age, where guys don't feel like they either rate to write a book, or don't. It kind of breaks that silent professional mentality that you have, and then it's like, and because you're like, oh no, I was just I always say it as jokingly, I'm like, I was just a fat kid doing my job, like it's fine, not, but there are times when people have told me to do that. And then there are times when I've talked to other friends, they're like, well, maybe we should, maybe teaming up, because on top of it too, like writing a book isn't easy, no matter how you swing it.
No,
it's not easy. And so when people are like, I think that's because I've had that, was like, it'd be a good idea if we covered it from this type of angle, and I just talked with a friend of mine. He's like, yeah, it's a good idea. Like maybe we should write it together. And I'm like, oh yeah, actually that would help, like at least someone can like go with a pain with
that
me,
was where with this, I ended up the most rewarding end, and like where this thing really took off. So like, the first manuscript, the initial manuscript that got the book deal, that was everything. That was a 60,000 raw word, from my point of view. So when I got the book deal back, that was the biggest part, was when I started reaching out, and I realized right from the beginning, it was, all right, they're asking for pictures. And I said, yes, but I have nothing, so do you guys have anything? Can you help me out here? And I mean, they responded in droves. Yeah. Like I've been posting daily on, you go across the social media spectrum. It's at Damn the Valley Book. That was the other thing too, is I never wanted it to be my thing.
Yeah.
A lot of authors out there, you see it pointed to their own personal. And I was like, I want to make it straight from the start. This is not my thing. This is our thing, and this is going to be created as a movement. Yeah. Because it really was, they've been there every step of the way. The pictures that have been posting up, like people start realizing, wait a minute, this is all pictures and video from the Arghandab. Like, holy crap, we thought you were just another military blog. It's like, no, this is all stuff from the story.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, the flag from the front cover there, we were talking before about that. That's through this. One of the guys reached out that I'd been interviewing and stuff. And he was like, I have the flag from the picture. And I'm like, wait, what? You know, people don't realize that, number one, that's a picture from the battlefield that somebody snapped after. So the Taliban lit off a 1,000-pound vehicle bomb, and it flattened the compound that 2nd Platoon was staying in. So, I mean, guys buried alive. And I know it wasn't, you know, that picture was from 2nd Platoon's end, but it just exemplified the feelings that deployment. You know, you would get beat up and knocked down, but you had to be relentless. You had to have that resiliency in there to be able to get up and stand up and, you know, wave your middle finger at the enemy and say, hey, we're still here. Yeah. You might have hurt us, but we're getting back up. You can't stop us.
Yeah.
I guess the media one to say is the old World War II poster with I'm the 82nd Airborne and this is as far as the bastards are going. You know, it ties back to that though, that mentality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this thing would never be where it's at if it wasn't for, you know, every situation in here was at least 3 guys and getting their viewpoints and putting them in. And I know, you know, even more so, especially for the chapters that really resonated with some people and some of the most graphic, like Specialist Johnston, you know, when he was killed, I go into 3 or 4 different viewpoints from there. Mm-hmm. And it's vivid. It's very vivid and everything, but it's not any one person's story or perspective. Yeah. This is all this other stuff brought in, and you can't get that full spectrum until you start doing that, because you're a team, you're a unit. Exactly. You're not going to get that picture from one guy that's really going to be the actual story. Yeah. So even here, you know, I'm sure there's more that's going to come from there, but everybody's looked it over. Everybody was in agreement, you know, and looked at it and said, okay, you know what, this is cleared. And, you know, even the Gold Star families, that was one of my biggest things was I was like, I have to go and at least let these families know that I have a book coming with, you know, their loved ones in it. Yeah. And make sure it's all right, or make sure it's at least. And I know, Specialist Johnston mom actually was one of that was tough. Yeah. That was really tough. But reaching out to her and her saying, well, you know, does his best friend Lisa know about it? And I'm like, yeah, he's seen the chapters and stuff. And she's like, all right, you know, that's good enough for me. Yeah. Yeah. And I was just like, whoa, you know, to that trust in that end from them, and then trust from the guys that I was able to bring this forward. I mean, it's a burden of sorts, but it really holds you to the fire, you know, in the way of like, you got to get this thing done right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I like what you did. And I think I'm seeing like kind of not a trend, but I think a really good way about soldiers and Marines, and when they write their books about being at the unit. Cause I was talking with the way you wrote it, it sounds like, you know, like I said, you wrote it, you interviewed everybody, is the way Clinton Romeshay did Red Platoon. Because everyone was after him about getting a book. And I listened to it before I interviewed him a few years back. And I was like, it was phenomenal because it wasn't him. It was everyone's actions on the day of. Yeah. And you're just like, and it really was, because it wasn't a, hey, look at me. Hey, I'm from I'm Clinton Romeshay from California, you know, like, and it was really the whole team put together. And you're like, oh my God, in everyone's views. And it was a phenomenal book because of that, you know, and I agree with you. I think that's, and putting the stories out there to as a whole, because, and speaking publicly about it. And I agree with you, because I didn't speak publicly about my stuff until about 2021. And one of the guys that was killed, Doug Bose, he was a Special Forces warrant officer. His brother, I believe, was a Marine officer, had never heard the story. And suddenly I'm on the internet on a podcast talking about his brother's death. And they had never known what had happened, who I was, what the on the ground. And so he reached out to one of the teammates that was, with me, a good friend of mine, you know, that we had developed a really close friendship. He had reached out to him, like, who's this Marine talking about my brother? And it was like, well, that was the Marine that was with your brother when he was killed. You know, so it's like that story gets out and fine. So when you go public, it's like sometimes the family, or at least some family members, get a little bit of closure, or a little bit of what actually happened that day, because there's only one or two people that know. Like, I'm the only one that knows, and then two other guys, but they didn't have my perspective. So it's, and I agree with you. I think making it not me, but us, I think would help, putting that into the ears of guys who are skeptical, or maybe they're like, I think we should do a book, because it is their legacy. We did a lot of stuff over there, guys in platoons and squads. Like, they accomplished a lot in Afghanistan, a lot in Iraq. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in other countries that, it's not, you don't have to be an ODA team or some, Delta or SEALs or whatever. Like, the guys on the ground in the infantry, and I've said this before too, and it's not a super popular opinion, but and I was told this when I was in, the entire purpose of the military is to support the infantry. And never forget that. And
even the guys, like high level Delta operators and stuff, they even say this, they echo the same thing. And I know it's like that humble end on them too, but they realize it. Like, it's like, you don't, without that large conventional force there, without those guys on the ground, the infantry bubbas, like, their scalpel mission and stuff has its place. And it does. I think we said this off camera beforehand, but where we would come in, we would build these targeting packages and whatnot. And then we'd get the call, all right, you guys are coming in for outer cordon, and you'd see the bird come in and they drop onto the roof and pop, 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 pop. And you're like, oh man, those are the guys that we just built something over the last month that have been harassing us, either taking shots at us, or we knew they were laying stuff in. You got to be kidding me, but I get it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something too, like you said, that's, because I remember when I was told that, I was like, wow, that is actually really true, because there's a lot of issues in the Marine Corps. Marines dealt with it more with other Marines, of like Marines showing up to the chow hall after a battle and their camis weren't clean, and some staff sergeant would lock them on for being dirty or not having a recent shave, and fights would break out in, KBR chow halls. And like, it's like, remember why you're here. Those guys are the main mission. No matter what you think, no matter whatever it is, they're the mission. And I remember
a lot of it was ego.
Yeah, exactly. It's
ego. Got a lot of ego involved, and when you have that ego rear its ugly head, exactly. It's, you have to put that aside. And what you're saying again, like, it's a team effort. It's all of us, and that is where that's honestly, that's the way forward. In everything with this, the therapeutic end of guys communicating again, peer to peer, and guys reconnecting again. And I see across the social campaigns too, like, oh my God, I remember this, or, these memories are coming back, or they're telling a little story in the comments and stuff. And it's so cool to see the guys coming back together through this type of thing, and how good it is for them, and how good it is for them to reconnect. That's what this is all about. I mean, we're still, and I think we're starting to realize that, we're so much stronger together than it is as these, either separate pieces, or as that egotistical, hey, look at me, I'm, whatever. It's like, but you were nothing without the foundation underneath you.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. And I agree with you on that. And that's, like I said, that's really cool to hear, and like I said, the therapeutic side of it too, like finally closing some loops, or even just getting with kids on the ground. I was doing a feature documentary. I was a cinematographer for last summer, and we followed around Afghan refugees, but special forces Afghan SF. They were all significantly younger though than I was like, well, how old are you guys? They're like, well, I joined the Afghan, SF in like 16, 18. I was like, oh my God. I was like, you guys would have been still kids when I was there, and I was like, they stood up the commandos like a few months before I got there, like a year before I got there, or something. And, but there's a kid there, and I think I told him where I was at, and he was like 21. So he was Afghan SF, but he came over on the evac. So he would have been like 20, 21 or something like that. And he was wanting to do Army SF. And so he was like prepping to do all that and like go join the Army. But he got out on the evacs, but he was a kid. He was like, I don't know, like 8, 9 years old or something. Not even that. And I was like, yeah, I was in Sorobi. And he's like, oh my God, that's my hometown. And then I showed him photos of me there in 2009. And he legit goes, I know those trees. I know that playground. He goes, I was on there. And he goes, those trees, because those trees aren't, he goes, the trees aren't there anymore. I don't know why, I don't know if it was a US thing or if it was like Taliban or whatever, but he was just like, oh, I know those trees. I know those. I remember those as a kid, and and the playground. And yeah, I was like, yeah, we would patrol Sarobi. I mean, patrolling was like quote unquote patrolling with the French. Like we just go shops and go shopping, and like it was like it was a hub. There's no firefights taking place in Sarobi Market. We were just going in and getting food, and our Terps would buy they'd buy the black market Heineken beers, and so it was it was like. It really true. It's like so when people ask me, especially about Afghanistan, I was like, well, it's holds a special place in your heart, or at least for me. I was really close with the people.
Yeah. And the people there were amazing. Those interactions and stuff were, they're special people for sure.
I agree. And, and the history there too, and we can kind of go down the nerd rabbit hole a little bit, but you guys were in Arghandab. Was that the valley with the Alexander the Great built like a mound or a mountain that like it's an artificial mountain?
Yes. There's Alexander the Great. And I got to actually go back and brush up on that because I know the history buffs and stuff are going to pull it out, but it's wild to see. I have something on the website. So damnthevalleybook.com has something on there called the Wall of Stories, but I've been also inserting things that I'll find articles and stuff about. And there's British military sketches because no cameras and stuff were out at the time. But there was a huge battle down there in 1880. And they literally mention the town of Piripamal. And you're like, here you are 1,000 years plus later in the same area with the same town name, fighting battles with insurgents. And you're like, you are kidding me. And then again, Russians in 1984. Almost echoed the same stuff. They lost an entire I think it was a brigade's worth down there. I mean, it was just a bloodbath, and it's like this place just holds this cradle, just is made for warfare. And they know what they're doing. It's the populace is the ones that drive this thing down there.
Yeah. And that's because we ran into all that, the Soviet, and that's what I say when I tell them, I was like, the history is insane. And I wrote papers on it. And after I gotten out, I was going through and getting my bachelor's. And so I read a lot of books, and it's just so rich with history. And then in every valley is different too. I mean, we rolled into one, and you're just like the Soviet armor, that's just laying on the side of the road. There was it was really funny. We were driving by one little village, or there's like a house on the side of the road, and they had a T-72 tank blown out, rusted. The barrel was pointed in a certain direction, and they attached their clothesline to the barrel to the house. Nice. And so they were just like drying clothes on this blown out T-72 tank, and or whatever it was, T-70 and BMPs.
We had heavy drop shoots.
Yeah. It was nuts, and we got into our valley. There's nothing in it because the Russians couldn't penetrate it. But there were some anti-aircraft guns or something that were like right at the foot. So you could like kind of sit in the chair a little bit, and it kind of swiveled. I mean, most of the barrel was gone and all this other shit.
Oh, it's so crazy.
It's just crazy. And then as a contractor, I went up to, it was in Panjshir. So I got to Panjshir Valley. Okay. And the site where Triple Nickel was, but now it's like a little Air Force base. And they had a whole like little, I don't even want to say that it wasn't a cave or anything, but like a little spot in the mountain. You just kind of like, it's tucked back, and they showed me, and it was all Soviet armor they had just left when they evacuated Afghanistan. So they just left it there. And this was 2010. I was like, oh my God. So you like go around the corner, and it's just like this little finger or whatever you'd say. And it was just like full of Russian armor. And like, it had like the big missiles, but they were all deactivated. Yeah. And Russian toe poppers going up to the lookout, because they just never cleared them. They're like, we don't need to, we cleared the path. So the Air Force guy that I was with, it was super chill there, but he goes, just don't go off the path. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And he's like, no, don't, because, and I look over and no shit, there's a Russian toe popper sticking right out of and I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, don't fuck around. Yeah. So, I went up to the top of this little outlook. They weren't really manning it. It was just more of like for guys like me as a contractor, like, oh my God, let's go check it out. So that, I'd go up there and take a few photos. I got photos of that, but yeah, it's like the history of it's insane. And, all the wars that took place, it's the crossroads of the world at one point, the history there, the House of War, like the British, the Anglo-Afghan War. And it's just, there's just certain parts too that there's just so much history, and it's gorgeous too. And some of these calots and some of these buildings have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Maybe not thousands, but hundreds,
That's
hundreds of years.
look up the shrine of Baba Wali.
Mhm.
That's actually like, that was right on the corner of our area, but like exactly what you're saying, like that thing had been there pre-British.
Yeah.
There's this shrine, and it has this big blue dome on it, and just this crazy, very ornate building and whatnot, place of worship, very clean and stuff, just off to the side of all of this. And here we are in the shit, and getting blown up left and right. And you're like, wait a minute, what it just some weird instances like that. And crazy to see that history behind, or like if you come up to a bombed out building, you see the carvings and stuff through the mud walls, and you're like, what was this? Like, it's just, makes you think of cradle of civilization. And, I know Iraq, like you had ancient Babylon and stuff near there, and that whole valley over that end. So like, it's wild, but then all of this stuff is cyclical. It just comes right back, and you're like, you're right back in there. Have we not learned these lessons yet? Like, what are we doing as humanity?
Yeah. And I just remember those villages just tucked away in the corners too, man. We went to the end of the road in our valley, and it's like, and there was another villages on the fingers, like you saw it, like, another 50, probably 500 meters or so up. And it's like, that's a whole little village with buildings, and we'll never see it. We never got to them, and because it was, we just couldn't logistically support it. The fact that we even got to the end of the road in our valley was a big deal. Obviously, it was resulted in a giant battle, but it was, we're just like, all right, well, maybe we'll get there someday. They just never got there. But you think about those people that weren't touched, though. I mean, we had Afghans in our valley that thought we were pre-Soviet era Afghans, are like, oh, because they just they're not connected to the world. They're just in their own little world. I'm sure some people knew, but most people are just not educated, or they're just like, yeah, whatever, man, I'm just here to live. And they're in this gorgeous valley, and some of those villages are just tucked away, and you're just like, God, it's like a backpacker's like dream. You're just like,
it kind of makes you jealous at sometimes.
Just like I just want to, like,
I could just remove myself from the world and go back to the ways of old, where I'm just in this little communal village. And there is an aspect to that does like, it's just very it has draw. It definitely does.
Yeah, it's simple. It has draw. You're like, oh man, yeah. But yeah, it's wild, and like I said, I think that's why a lot of things always kind of draw you back to Afghanistan. Just the history there. It's just, it's nuts. But yeah. Oh, yeah. So what's moving forward then with Damn the Valley? We kind of hinted a little bit about some other stuff. Is there anything in the works moving forward?
So there's definitely, I mean, with this whole thing coming up, I knew from the very start that there was going to be some more stuff coming from this. I mean, I've seen it, but there is a documentary in the works. We're creating the pitch reel, as you will.
Yep.
So get ready for that coming.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's more stuff from there, helping out other people with their books. There's matter of fact, one of the guys that was in there, he was Doc with us. I watched him. It was Doc Schultz. Mm-hmm. He so many things during this, just weird instances, or I guess kind of the path during this, the flow that I'm in with this whole project, wild stuff. But I was going to Columbia Business School, finishing up my classes over there this last summer? And I get in contact with him because I knew he was a writer, or aspiring writer or illustrator. I was like, I knew he liked to write. I actually thought he was going to be somebody who would have been the one to come up with this. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? I'm going to school. Where are you going to school? Well, Columbia. Wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
Hold on a second. He's like, yeah, I'm actually walking across I'm getting my graduate in, in creative writing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're kidding me. I'm getting you're getting your master's in creative writing at the same time that I'm finishing up classes at Columbia Business School right now. How did I not even know you were here doing this?
Yeah.
And I got to watch him cross the aisle. But through this, he's looking at, very possibly a publishing company on that end to help guys get their stories out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's so cool. Who knows where everything is going to go, because I mean, we have the documentary and we have the end to where the Airborne and Special Ops Museum has a bunch of the artifacts from this particular story. So there's talk of doing a section during the renovation over there that's going to feature stories from this book and from other books that come around surrounding it. So, I mean, that's something to look out for too. Who knows if there's a feature film? I know that's your forte. So
yeah, I'll try.
Who knows, Ethan? Who knows?
Right. Yeah. No, it's, it's kind of funny, when I think about war and feature films, it's like how much time has gone by, and it's like, you wonder if there's going to be a slew of GWAT films, just like there was a slew of like Vietnam films, in like the 1980s, there's just like, somewhere wild, but there's like, like Vietnam movie, and you kind of wonder if there's going to be like a slew of GWAT films. Like, all right, we're just going to do the GWAT to death.
I just hope if they do, they get the story right. That's the thing is there's so many things and so many instances in here, but like those stories echo across the same, and they're special to the people that were there. But you got to get the story right, and you have to, the vision there and like what you're trying to produce and put out there. It's got to be it's got to be true. It's got to be correct. It's got to be true. And you got to have your heart in it because, I'll tell you with this thing, I've faced that to where it's like, how special is this to you? Mm. And really, because it's not for me.
Yeah.
It's for these other guys. That's what drives me through this.
Yeah.
And some of the hell that I've gone through in putting this out there and some of the stuff that I've faced in doing that, it's worth it because of that. Mm. But, I'm excited to see it crossing a threshold that it has and to see where it's going. But yeah, the story's got to stay. It's got to stay true. And that's what I'm hoping to keep along the way.
Well, that's awesome. Well, where can people find you and where can they find the book?
So the easiest thing for social media, Damn the Valley, at Damn the Valley Book, across all of them, Instagram, TikTok, damnthevalleybook.com kind of has the link tree almost in there with everything in there. You've got a bunch of other things like Wall of Stories and whatnot. You can find the book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere that carries books. I mean, honest to God, if you want to read it that bad, but you're strapped for cash, like some of us out there, go to your library. It has an ISBN. They'll get it in. I actually got it into the library in my own local community. And matter of fact, I think now Maryland, I know it's a Harford County up here has the whole library system up here has it, but it's moving. But I'm like, just get the story out. I don't even care. Like, just get it out there. So anywhere books are sold, pretty much.
Awesome. Well, this is it. We'll definitely have to do a follow-up podcast. This was awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on.
No, Ethan, I'd love to, man. And thanks for having me. Seriously, it's guys like you putting these stories out there that helps us do that.
Awesome.
And I thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, no worries, man. I think this is, like I said, it's great to hear these stories and seeing other guys do this. I think it should give inspiration for other guys to either tell their stories, talk about their stories, get it out there. I think it's an important thing for our generation of war fighters to do that. So I greatly appreciate you coming on.
No, absolutely. And thank you again.